Hello, Calm Parents. Welcome back to another episode of Parenting Teens with Dr. Cam. I'm your host, Dr. Cam. Disrespect, backtalk, and lying are just a few of the problematic teen behaviors many parents are trying to deal with. What do you do when you've tried everything and nothing seems to work? That's what we're going to tackle in today's episode. I'm joined by Kimball Lewis, the CEO of Empoweringparents.com. I want to get that right. In addition to his leadership and management roles, he contributes as an editor, a homeschooling expert, and a parent coach. Kimball is frequently interviewed by CBS News in Tampa Bay, Florida, for his expert parenting advice. Welcome, Kimball. I'm so happy you could join us today.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Cam.
Absolutely. So let's start with what inspired you to start Empoweringparents.com.
Well, I actually inherited Empoweringparents.com, and I'd been aware of the work of this guy named James Lehman, who came up with this program called the Total Transformation Program about 10 years ago now. And he was an acquaintance of mine. I was aware of him. He had this great accountability-based program that was wildly popular in the late 2000s, and he passed away suddenly, sort of at the height of his popularity. My initial introduction to it was driving around and listening to his ads on the radio where he said, and it's the first thing that ever caught me is if you're in a constant battle of arguments with your kids, just remember you don't have to attend every argument that you're invited to. And that really resonated with me. He lived in my town. I had kind of a connection with him. I always had a technology background, but after he passed away, some other folks that were involved in the company approached me and said, you have a technology background, you're a parent, you understand these programs. How do we transform this to make it modern? It used to be books and CDs and that type of thing. So I brought it on. It's electronic now. We used to sell in the United States and Canada. Now our programs are offered worldwide now. We have people in 28 countries that are using the programs thanks to the value of the internet and all these resources. So everything's very available for parents who are struggling these days. There's a lot of information out there.
Yeah, it's so wonderful too. I think too, though, it comes to the point where it becomes so much information and it's like, okay, how do we now navigate that and bring it in? And so you've got like a program that really focuses in on here's the issues and solutions for them, which is great. And I think one of the big things and what I had really wanted to kind of jump into was just difficult, challenging behaviors. I always liken it to playing like an endless game of whack-a-mole, where, you deal with it over here and it pops up over here and you deal with it. And so we're trying everything and it's not working. So what are some of the strategies that you have to help us deal with these challenging behaviors that just keep popping up?
Well, one of the key things that we talk about with parents is one of the reasons kids do these behaviors over and over again is it actually works for them. They're using it to solve a problem. So like if your child just won't do chores and you're coming home at the end of a long workday and you're tired of the fight over whether or not the child did the chore or whatever it is they were supposed to do. And you finally throw up your hands and you're like, you know what? It's way easier for me to do it myself than it is to have yet another battle with my son or daughter about doing it. And so parents kind of give up. They're like, I can't do this. They've been dragged into the fight with their kid. Their kids are very good at that. It's one of the few skills in their early life that they're very good at, which is pulling their parents down into a power struggle. And so it works for them. Why do they do it? These problem-solving skills that are characterized by defiance and backtalk, that type of thing, it actually works for them. So the key step is to make sure that those skills no longer work for them. And you do that through consequences, which we can get in. And then also you have to offer them alternative behaviors, which will work for them. It's the combination of those two things. And it takes a little bit of time for it to set in, but if you're very consistent about it, it's a lot of reason to have hope. We've seen lots and lots of kids turn around and they actually feel better once they get better at this, the child. So kids who act out and don't behave well, they're not happy kids. When they learn how to behave better, they become much happier kids. So
I mean, no child wants to get in trouble, right? Like that's not their end game, is to get in trouble. So they're doing the best they can with what they know. So like you're saying, okay, we want to stop the behavior that we're not thrilled about, but they're doing it because it's working, but give them another method. another way to do it. So let's start with consequences, because consequences, I think, has kind of lost its way in my mind, and it's kind of become a fancy word for punishment. So how would you define consequences and how consequences work?
So we have this saying, if you ever subscribe to our newsletter, you'll get this pitch once in a while where we say you can't punish your child into good behavior.
Right.
What you need are effective consequences. And to the child, it feels the same. It feels like they've done something wrong or inappropriate, and they're being punished or a consequence. To the parent who's applying these things, what you want to ask yourself is there a learning aspect to this consequence? And very often, so we recommend, for example, that consequences are task-oriented. Mm-hmm. That allows them to practice the good behavior skills. So I'll just give you a quick example. If you have siblings and your son's hitting your daughter all the time, the consequence is perhaps you take away their phone or electronics, which is a very common thing to do. Take it away for like 3 hours. And then during that 3 hours, your child has to not hit his sister during that time frame and has to behave appropriately. Mm-hmm. And then if they succeed in that, then they get their phone back. Mm-hmm. So they're actually practicing that. The consequence is they're practicing that skill, which is they're not talking back, or they're not hitting their sister or daughter or brother. So that's a task-oriented aspect to it, where they're actually learning something through it.
So when they're doing that, you had also said, like, we're learning another skill. So they're hitting their sibling or yelling at their sibling. It's more likely in teens, but I've seen hitting too. Because there's a lot of argument and there's a lot of resentment. So there's a reason behind that behavior. So when we're teaching and saying, don't do that, the piece of the learning, what is that learning piece in that process?
So the learning is, there's two ways to go about the learning. One is they need to practice that self-control. So you want the consequence to be long enough. If you say you don't hit your sister for 5 days, or don't yell at your sister for 5 days and get your phone book, that's too long term. They're not going to be able to succeed. But if you can do it 3 or 4 hours, and you can get 3 or 4 hours of peace within your household, they've practiced that. They've got their phone back. The other piece is you need to offer them the alternative skills. As what should you do the next time you're frustrated with your sister instead of yelling or hitting? And you can make that task-oriented too. And this is going to sound goofy, but this really works. You can take something away that they value, like their electronics, and then say, you lose your electronics for 3 hours. And during those 3 hours, you need to write me a letter explaining to me why we don't hit or yell or use abusive language in this household. And the next time my sister frustrates me, here's what I'm going to do instead. And you can actually work with them as to what it's going to say. And it has to be long, but it might take them 20 minutes or so to actually write this thing out. And they don't get their phone back until they've written this letter. And they're going to think it's hokey. They're going to roll their eyes, but they're going to understand over time when they write this is what I need to do. And they actually have completed the task and they get it to you. And if you do this consistently over and over again, after a while, they're just going to be like, you know what? I'm just going to leave my sister alone. So it actually works. So these things sound hokey, but it works. Like the other one is putting the rules of the household, the basic rules of the household on the refrigerator.
Yeah.
Like spelled out. We don't use abusive language in this household. We don't swear. We don't hit people in this household. And then when that happens, you can just point to the refrigerator and say, these are the rules of this household.
Right.
And then you avoid this. I don't know if you can imagine there's no posted speed limits and you're driving down the highway and then a police officer pulls you over. It feels like it's personal between you and the police officer as to whether you were speeding or not. But there's a sign. The police officer can say, there's the sign at 65 miles an hour. You were going 75. That's why I pulled you over. You can do the same thing. It helps get rid of some of the arguments. I mean, the child's still going to argue, but it's not a personal argument between two individuals. It's an argument between the child and the rules because they don't like the rule. It's a different dynamic. So that helps a lot also.
It does. And I mean, every time I've been pulled over for speeding, I have an argument in my head too that tries to justify it, and it's not right. Yeah. So even adults are going to justify what they did, right? Even though they see the sign and know that it wasn't right. So I think that's normal behavior.
But if you think it's arbitrary that police officer decided what the speed limit was that day, it makes it that much worse.
Yes, it does.
So.
Definitely. Right. And so this is really key, because I think a lot of times we make the assumption that the kids should know better and know what the rules are. Like, of course, you're not supposed to hit people, but having it out there and outlined makes it really clear that you're aware of it and that it's a rule. So I think that's important. Now, another thing I've seen parents do, though, when they have the rules, is there's like 5 pages of rules.
No, you don't need that.
So tell us a little bit of, how do we decide what the rules are so that we don't have like this laundry list of stuff, which then becomes, you might as well not have any?
Yeah, you have to decide what are the basic values within your household. And you also have to be on board with the fact that as the parent, you get to decide what the basic values are within your household. It's not a democracy. Kids have their input, but the parent is the legitimate authority in the household. And if the parent says, we don't swear in this household, there's no swearing in the household. And if you do, there's a consequence. Yelling, any abusive type behavior. You don't want abusive behavior. You don't want hitting. You don't want property destruction. You don't want the kids punching and putting holes in the walls. And then abusive behavior. Those are the sort of the key types of things. Then it can get down to some of the functional things like no electronics until your homework's done, for example. And it should be 5 or 6 or 7 things just to maintain a sense of order and accountability. And you want to avoid a situation where the child is using abusive behavior, either verbal or physical, to solve their problems within the household. And it's like 5 or 6 rules. That's pretty much it. Right.
And so, one of the things you just said too was to solve their problems. So I think a lot of times what I see is that parents their focus is strictly on the behavior that they want to change. And the reason it keeps popping up or shows up in other ways, because they're not dealing with the issue of why that behavior exists. So how do you address the behavior that's causing the problem or causing the behavior?
Well, we actually will focus on the behaviors because it's that lack of problem solving skills. There are different types of, there's a few fundamental issues. Kids have social issues. They don't know how to deal with other people. They don't know how to deal with when other people get angry at them. They're new in life. They're not used to that. My wife does customer service work, and I asked her, how do you deal with people like, upset customers? And she said, you learn over time how to deal with it and how to stay relaxed when the customer's upset. And it's the same thing with kids. They have to learn how to deal with those types of social issues and social interactions. A lot of kids will make other kids angry and they don't know why. They haven't figured that out yet. They also have issues of dealing with frustration, dealing with anxiety, dealing with disappointment. Those are all new feelings that are very complex for anyone, but for a child who's never been through that before, it's very difficult. And when you're focusing on the behaviors, you're showing them how to through sort of self-control and better problem solving skills, solve those things. So you actually use the behaviors to help their growth. Okay. As they tackle each of those behaviors, they start building up the confidence that they can deal with other problems as well.
So if the behaviors are coming out because they're really anxious or they're angry, you're saying that by addressing the behaviors, that's going to help them handle their anxiety and their anger? It
is. And let me explain that a little further. So if you have a child, you think they have serious anxiety problems, you should see a doctor. You should, because there might be an issue. But very often everyone has anxiety to some degree. And the way you deal with anxiety is you confront those issues. And so you want to coach your child on how to confront those issues. And when they've been through a couple of those, they gain some confidence. You'll hear this a lot. The kids that have low self-esteem have behavior problems. Mm-hmm. And that's true. We agree with that. That's true. Kids who have behavior problems often have low self-esteem. But where we differ with a lot of people is the way we approach it is that we don't have tons of confidence that we can address the esteem itself. And then as a result, the behavior gets better. Because it's hard to do that. And their esteem may or may not grow. It's hard. That's a difficult thing. But what we found is that when you address the behavior issues, their esteem actually rises. So we have this saying that you can't feel your way to better behavior, but you can behave your way to better feelings. And so we address the behaviors as a ways to sort of raise their esteem, and they start developing problem solving skills that way. And they actually feel better about themselves. And it's been effective. That's the other thing is, I mean, if you could somehow raise their esteem and they behave better, that would be great. We just found that that's not particularly effective. And at the end of the day, the goal is appropriate behavior, no matter how you're feeling. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a life. You're going to go through ups and downs in life. You're going to go through depressions. You're going to go through breakups. You're going to go through, all sorts of, job losses, difficult things. And the goal is to behave appropriate and not be abusive, either verbally or physically, to other people when you're feeling down and out. And that's the goal. And that's what we're trying to teach the kids.
Right. So I think the biggest piece of this is just realizing that the rules are set up ahead of time so kids know what it is and it's communicated. How about the consequences? Because I see a lot of people in the heat of the moment saying, just give me your phone. I'm taking your phone. So why does that work? Or is there another way to do that?
Yeah, no, you don't want to. It's perfectly fine for parents to not give out an immediate consequence if you're not sure what it is, and let things calm down and say, I have to go think about this, and tomorrow we'll talk about what the consequences are for what you've done. And we highly recommend that. The good news is, for most of the parents that come to us, they have these behave. The reason they're coming to us is that these behaviors have happened over and over and over again, and it's not a surprise. And we do coaching with parents, and because it's not a surprise, we put a plan in place. Is the next time this happens, here's what we're going to do. And then you go into execution mode. It actually brings the anxiety level of the parent way down. They know what they're going to do. They know what the consequence is going to be. And they can actually share what the consequences will be with the child ahead of time. Right. But if you're in that surprise situation where something happened you didn't expect, you're not sure what the consequence is, there's nothing wrong with delaying. Wait a day or so, wait several hours, let things calm down, sort of think through. You don't want to be reactive about it.
Right. So we want to make sure we're calm in the moment. So if we're not feeling calm in the moment, how do we handle that? Like, the kids are very good at triggering us and pushing our buttons. They're
experts at that. They're not, kids aren't in charge of a lot of things. Like, they're not the boss at work. They're not in charge at school, but they have this superpower, which is that they're in charge of their parents so often, and they can make their parents angry in the way that no one else in the world could make a parent angry. So we recommend for parents to disengage. When a child is trying to pull you into a power struggle and pull you down into a fight, is to disengage. And you just look at them and say, we can't communicate, and I'm not going to talk with you when you're behaving this way towards me. And you separate and you leave the child. And it actually leaves them in a room arguing with themselves, and it doesn't work anymore for them. So they might actually they'll follow you into the other room. They'll follow like this. It gets crazy sometimes. And if the child's old enough to be home alone, we actually recommend the parents get in the car, just go away, just leave the situation and then come back to it. Okay. That doesn't mean no consequences, but what it does mean is you don't go down to your child's level and start engaging in these fights.
All right.
It's kind of like at work, like if you have an issue at work with your boss, if you work for a reasonable company, it's not a screaming match. The boss doesn't like yell and scream or whatever. They handle the things like sort of very even tempered as best they can. It's difficult. It's not hard. I mean, it's not easy as a parent to do this because there's a lot of emotions involved, but you want to take that approach when you're dealing with it.
Right. So part of a lot of the focus is like the relationship building piece. So where does that fit into this technique? So
the relationship one of the things that we talk about with the relationship building is that as the parent, you have an obligation to set limits. Your child's not necessarily going to like that. But you owe it to your child to do that. And you can explain to your child, this is why I do that. But you want to coach your child. That's the key thing, is that when they're not behaving well, you want to offer them what the alternatives are. And you can do that through the coaching. There's also, of course, you need to spend time with your child if you can. As teenagers get older, they want to separate, so it doesn't always happen as much. But you want to make sure that your child understands, and they may not actually, and that's okay, but that you're setting limits because that's your job as the parent. I mean, that's what you do. Mm-hmm. And they need to be able to, because these acting out skills, when they get into the real world, aren't going to work the way they work at home. It's going to be a much more difficult situation.
Right.
So And in terms of the relationship, the other thing we point out, and this is very important, this a lot, is not to take your child's behavior personally. And because it feels personal, especially when if your daughter's sitting in the kitchen with you and is saying, F you, mom, like just looking you right in the eye and just saying horrible things to you. We have parents come to us. They feel terrible about that. We tell them it's a behavior problem. It's not a personal problem. Don't take it personally, and address it as a behavior problem for a couple of reasons. One is it really is a behavior problem, and when they get better and they learn how to solve their problems better, they're not going to be trying to solve them by swearing at you in the kitchen and telling you how awful you are as a person. And you want them to get better at that. And the other thing is you need to offer your child forgiveness. You can't offer your child grace if you're taking those things personally. And you don't want to do that. You want to realize my child's a teenager. They're going through a difficult time. I want to have a good relationship with them in the long term. I need to forgive them for all the horrible things they're saying to me because it's a behavior problem. It's not me personally. It would have been any parent going on. So not taking your child's behavior personally is very important for our programs.
Right. And then understanding, like, how do we get to the point of why they're feeling the need to say, I hate you? So we're dealing with the behaviors, but how are you handling, like, how do you handle the situation of why they feel the need to yell that?
Well, for most of the parents we're working with, they're saying, I hate you because you're the limit setter in the household. And they don't like that. And it could be that you haven't been spending enough time with your child. There's a whole bunch of hosts of things, but that's not an excuse for abusive behavior. And that's not a way to approach relationships. And as a parent, we always ask parents, you need to model the behaviors that you want to see your kids doing. So if you want your child to be more warm towards you, be more warm towards your child. Show them how it's done. And it will be a two-way street.
Yeah, I think the modeling is an enormous piece of this because we see a lot of parents that are yelling at their kids to not yell, right? So it is looking at, like, what are you teaching them? Because the only people they really are learning from is you. So it's like, if you're not liking your kids' behaviors, it's kind of asking, where did they learn those behaviors?
Yeah, you are the number one influence on your child.
Yeah, absolutely.
And half of our program is explaining what is effective and what's not effective parenting techniques. And yelling at your child is just not effective. We all do it, and you should forgive yourself if you do it, because we all break down at various times. But it doesn't work. And if it did work, we wouldn't have any parenting problems, because you just yell and scream at your kid and they would come into line and they would be fine, right? Or you could hire Dr. Cam to spend an hour every week and you'd scream at their kid and they'd go home.
Oh, never in a million years.
And they would be fine. It wouldn't work, right? And it wouldn't work. Yeah, we do it. So you want to model that. If you're screaming at your kid all the time, you need to stop it, because it's not effective.
Right.
And then start thinking what is effective.
Yeah.
And the screaming doesn't help the relationship. Those things hurt the relationship, because although we can explain to a parent not to take these behaviors personally, and their parents are generally old enough and mature enough that when you explain, don't take it personally because it's a behavior problem, and then that'll help your relationship. Likewise, when you're screaming things at your kids, you might say something that you regret. Your child's not mature enough to offer that grace and forgiveness the way that you might as an adult.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful about that also. When you find yourself yelling and screaming, your child, it builds up resentments.
Yeah, it does. And a lot of times when I talk to kids who literally are not happy with their parents, I think part of it is their parents aren't hearing what their kids need. And so a lot of that behavior that's acting out, don't take it all personally, but sometimes it's something that you need to hear.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things where, I try to help understand is that we're not 100% always right. Like, we've got to listen to what our kids need from us too. And I think that's where, the difference between the relationships and the behaviors become very challenging. Right.
Yeah. We find that scheduling time to talk to your kids out of the heat of the moment often works. Like tomorrow from 5 to 5:30, let's sit down and discuss this and let things calm down. And you can kind of prepare for it. That helps as well. It brings the stress and anxiety level down.
Right.
So
yeah, definitely does that. So how can parents find you and your strategies?
So we are at empoweringparents.com. We're also on Facebook. If you just search for Empowering Parents on Facebook or Instagram, you can find us as well. And if you come to our website, we have hundreds of free articles. You can sign up for our newsletter. And you can also, our program's Total Transformation Program, you can sign up for that as well. And it streams to PCs, tablets, phones. So you can start it immediately if you want to jump right into it.
Wonderful. All right. So before we go, any parting words of encouragement for parents with teenagers?
That these behavior problems are solvable. Focus on one behavior at a time. That's one of the things we focus. Just pick one, work on that one, get that one better, and there's hope. There's hope. If you're consistent, do more effective than ineffective stuff. There's hope. We see kids changing and parents changing all the time.
I love that. Thank you, Kimball. I'm so grateful you could join us today.
Thank you, Dr. Kim.
Absolutely. And thank you, parents, for taking time out of your busy day to spend with us. If you want to learn more about how to help your teens thrive, you can grab my top 10 secrets for raising teens at askdrcam.com/parenting tips. Finally, if you enjoyed this episode and the helpful strategies Kimball shared with us, please take a quick moment to rate and review. This helps other parents like you find the show. I encourage you to share it with a friend as well. Until next time, have a peaceful, positive, calm day.